is Sean McIndoe. He covers the NHL for The Athletic, co-host of the Puck Soup podcast. Follow him on Twitter at DownGoesBrown. Sean, top of the morning to you. How are you and your family doing during all this?
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. We're all holding up well under the circumstances. So, no complaints there.
Sean?
Good to hear.
Yeah, it is good to hear. Sean, how many different plans are you aware of, if any, that the NHL have? How many different scenarios are they trying to do it, and when is the earliest that they think possibly that maybe their first scenario starts?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting to the point now with the NHL where I'm starting to think that there are so many different plans and so many variations that kind of one plan bleeds into the next. I don't even know if there's a number. I don't know if Gary Bettman could give you a number. They've just got so many different scenarios and that they're keeping the door open on. And that's the right way to handle it right now. I mean, at this point, none of us know what tomorrow or next week is going to look like, let alone a month or a couple of months from now. So they are exploring all the options. They are not letting themselves get pinned down, and some of those options are best case scenarios that sound a lot like a resumption of a normal season, and some of them get very strange and get way out there, and I don't think we're particularly close to getting an answer, and it's also something that's going to be largely out of the NHL's control. I think they're going to be watching what other sports do. They're going to be watching what the situation is in the various markets that they're in, and my guess is that a month, maybe 2 months from now, it'll be pretty clear which is the right way to go. But right now, we don't have that, and so they're doing exactly what they should do, which is not saying no to any idea that anyone comes up with, no matter how crazy.
Sean, how much talk is there of how late they can go? Because one could argue, while it's far from ideal, but if you're going to have a multi-month layoff, you could have one season go into the next, because most teams will be off. Only a few teams will be playing until the very end, and everybody will have, in theory, gotten kind of back in shape. I mean, I'm just wondering, is there hey, listen, we got to have our season done by Labor Day? Have you heard of a drop dead, we can't play hockey past this date point?
No, I haven't, and that's a little bit surprising, because I think when this first happened and the NHL first hit pause, there was a feeling among a lot of us that, well, geez, they got to get it back out there relatively quick, because you can't play hockey too deep into the summer, if only because you're playing in these warm weather markets. The ice is going to be a mess, and the league has come back and they've said, actually, no, we don't think so. We've made a lot of progress in terms of the quality of the ice, especially in warm weather places. Playing all those outdoor games helps. That they've learned a few things. They seem to feel that, at least in terms of the quality of the ice the players are playing on, they can go pretty much any time. And so then you start thinking about it. You look at the other things, and I know one of the concerns was if the Summer Olympics ended up going this year, the NHL didn't want to be competing against that. They've got their TV deal with NBC. They didn't want to be coming back and having no TV coverage in the States because it was all hands on deck for the Olympics. Now that's not going to happen, so that's no longer in the way. The main thing that does seem to keep coming up is that the NHL would strongly prefer to play a full season next year. They understand that the revenue hit that they're going to take this year is going to be severe. That's going to hit the teams. It's going to hit the players as well. They split everything 50-50 with the owners. So everybody's taking a hit. There's really no way to avoid that. They would very much like to get back to normal, or at least back to something close to normal next year, and that means playing a full season. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to start that full season the first week of October like you normally would. If you could push things back, maybe you start in November, maybe you squeeze things as you go, you get rid of the All-Star break, get rid of the bye week, and you can potentially be done 2021 playoffs by not that much later than you normally would. That is a possibility. That doesn't feel very realistic, because you're squishing an awful lot of hockey and you're asking an awful lot of these players to basically, in some cases, be going 14, 15 months. That's a really tough ask, but it is still on the table, because this league very much would like to get both a Stanley Cup handed out this year and something close to a full season in terms of how many games are played next year.
Sean, if I were to say which one's more important, my guess would be the 2021 season. As we've discussed, there is no league more dependent upon the gate than the National Hockey League. And the idea of playing without fans, although maybe fulfilling a season is terrific, it's not going to help all that much from a revenue standpoint. Isn't 2021 really and truly financially more important than what they do in 2020?
That's the key word right there, is financially, because I think if you were to ask hockey fans which is more important to them, would you rather see a Stanley Cup handed out this year in something close to a normal playoff situation, and then maybe next year it's a 60-game season. Maybe we scrap some of those games in October, November that nobody remembers anyway. I think you get pretty close to unanimous agreement from fans that they want to see the playoffs this year, and if that means a shorter season, then they're okay with it. But you're absolutely right. From an NHL's financial perspective, which is going to be their top priority, that might tip the scales over to the other side, because this is a league. The TV contract is nice, but it's not a deal breaker. It's not something like the NBA where you've got billions of dollars at stake and you got to make sure you get out there if you possibly can and finish the season. NHL's not in that situation. NHL, far more so than any other league, it's about how many tickets do we sell, how many beers do we sell, how many parking spots, all of that sort of thing, as well as some of the corporate sponsorships, which maybe would still come in with some revenue if you're playing without fans. But yeah, this is a league, as you said, very dependent on the gate, far more so than the other leagues. Doesn't have that great big TV contract to fall back on. So if it comes down to a dollars and cents decision, as strange as it would sound to the average fan, the NHL might choose regular season hockey in October over a Stanley Cup being awarded in the summer.
He's Sean McIndoe. He covers the league for The Athletic, co-host of the Puck Soup podcast. You can follow Sean on Twitter at DownGoesBrown. How married is the NHL to finishing this regular season? Because I don't think the NBA has to, because there's such a difference between the playoff teams and the non-playoff teams. But in the NHL, you've got 5 teams within 3 points of one another for the final playoff spots in the East. It's a bit of a mess also in the West. I mean, it seems as if either they have to come up with a hard and true formula to determine who the playoff teams are with no more regular season games, or they need to have a week or 2 weeks of regular season hockey, even if it's just the teams fighting for playoff spots play one another to determine who in fact makes it. How married do you think the league is to having some sort of regular season, or are all the plans you're hearing, Sean, have going straight to the playoffs?
How married? You know what? It's like a lot of marriages. There is the best case scenario of what they might like, and then there's what they're probably actually going to get. I think, yes, ideally they would love to finish the regular season, and we've heard that, again, both from the league as well as from a lot of the players, because they know that if they don't finish that season, that's a lot of revenue gone, which means that's a lot of their paycheck that's gone. But realistically, it's just so hard to imagine when you look forward and you think about the time crunches that we're going to be facing and when things might be ready to start again, if they are anytime soon. It's very hard to sit there and say that every team's going to play the 10 or 12 games that they've got left in the regular season. So you're already talking about condensing it down, and then that brings up all sorts of other issues. Like, are you really going to tell the Detroit Red Wings or the Ottawa Senators or the LA Kings, teams that are way out of the playoffs, would have nothing to play for at the best of times? Are you going to tell them they got to leave their families, leave their communities, come back so that they can play 2 or 3 games? I mean, that seems strange to me. It seems like something I think there might be some pushback on. Not to mention, as unfair as it would seem to say, some team's going to miss the playoffs by a few points because they didn't get to play a full season. Is it fair if that team makes the playoffs by going out and beating the New Jersey Devils 12-1 because the Devils have nothing to play for and just want to go home? Is that a situation you want? The answer might be, as you kind of touched on, is you basically draw a line somewhere and say these teams are still in the running for playoffs, and they're the only teams we're going to worry about, and they're going to play each other. It'll be some sort of play-in. It'll be kind of a little bit like the Major League Baseball wild card play-in, where you've got a few teams playing in short series. Maybe it's 1 game, preferably best 2 out of 3. The one nice bonus to doing something like that, and this is a plan that's been floated around a bit, is if you expanded the list of playoff teams from the usual 16 down to 24, if you said, let's take the 24 best teams right now and we can have some sort of play-in tournament, geez, just a coincidence, going to 24 teams happens to just get you the Montreal Canadiens and the Chicago Blackhawks, two of your very biggest markets, very biggest TV audiences. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to get both of those teams into this thing? And I think the NHL is looking at that. Financially, that would be pretty attractive. The flip side of it is just, man, you look at this and you say, how are we going to get 4 rounds of regular playoffs, let alone doing even more on top of that to expand it out? So everything is on the table, and I think they're certainly looking at some sort of scenario there. But I can't see them making these bad teams come back to play 2 games that nobody's going to want to have any part of playing.
No doubt there. Sean, I am someone who spent the majority of my life working in minor league hockey as a broadcaster before settling in on this talk show thing. And while we have a team in our backyard here in the ECHL that does really well, I am worried for the minor leagues, for the junior leagues. How concerned should hockey be, not about the NHL, but about the E? About some of these other minor leagues. I think the A survives, but this is something that could crush minor league hockey, in my opinion. Is there any sentiment that this will affect the other leagues, and how much so?
I think you raise a great point, and it absolutely should be a concern. It's not something I've heard a ton of, mainly because I mean people are just they're worried about the NHL at this point,
right,
and what that's going to look like going forward. But yeah, I mean we talked about the NHL being largely gate dependent. I mean these minor leagues they're completely gate dependent. There's no big TV deals there. There's nothing other than how many bodies can you get into the rink to come and watch this stuff. And yeah, certainly a lot of them, if they have to be shut down for a while, that's going to have an impact. And then even if we do come back, how many of your season ticket holders, how many of your best fans aren't going to feel comfortable coming back into a building? How many of them lost their own jobs and aren't looking to spend what little amount of discretional spending they've got left on minor league hockey tickets? So there's any number of ways that this is going to ripple through all of society. And yeah, that is certainly a legitimate concern. And then what does that look like for the hockey world and hockey ecosystem if suddenly you don't have these lower minor leagues that a lot of fans probably don't think about very much day to day, but that serve a purpose, and whether that's giving you the next generation of players or giving you the next generation of fans. We all know hockey is a sport that is best experienced in person. You go to the game, and that's where you fall in love with it. If you don't have that, and you don't have that opportunity for fans in pockets all across, especially the United States, what does that look like going forward? It's a scary question, and it's one that at some point the hockey world is going to have to reckon with.
Sean, a final question for me is, hockey salary cap is all dependent on what last year's revenue was. And now you can project it out, but I'm guessing the season comes back even, revenue for this year is not going to be what it was projected. And if the cap is off by, say, $5 million, I mean, that's a second-line defenseman or a second-line winger. I mean, $5 million in the NHL is a ton of money cap-wise if you lose it. I mean, are there concerns going forward that next year's going to be a bit messy because, well, there's going to be a lot of free agents because the cap's going to be low?
Yep, that is certainly something to consider. It's funny. It feels like it was years ago, but it was only about a week before all of this happened and everything shut down that Gary Bettman was telling us the cap was going to go up to about $88 million. It's about 83 now. So there's your $5 million increase. That a lot of teams had earmarked for improving or even for just keeping the roster that they had with younger guys getting higher salaries. And now clearly it's not going to be going up. That implies revenue's up. Revenue isn't going to be up. Revenue is going to be way down. There's some estimates that say if this is it, if the NHL season is over, you're talking about maybe 60-70% of your revenue from a normal season. Now, in theory, that means next year's salary cap goes down to 60 or 70% of what it is now. So you're talking not even $5 million, you're talking tens of millions. That isn't going to happen because that doesn't benefit either the owners or the players. There's no reason, especially if they feel like they can play a full season next year and get somewhere close to a regular revenue situation. It doesn't benefit everyone to blow up 31 different teams' cap situations and just have contract Armageddon where everybody's releasing guys and guys are getting bought out and there's free agents and no room to sign them. So the NHL and NHLPA can sit down and say, okay, forget about what the rules say. We're going to make an exception, and we're going to say that this is where the cap should be, and that's what will end up happening. The question is, how do you do that, and can you get the players and the owners to actually agree and do something for the good of the game without it turning into a big dramatic fight the way that everything else these two sides seem to try to do always ends up going. So that is another thing to keep an eye on when you get to next year. How do you even figure out a cap in a situation where the rules you have around caps are going to lead to disaster that nobody wants?
His Twitter handle is Down Goes Brown. You can follow him on the website Down Goes Brown, and he wrote a book, The Down Goes Brown History of the NHL, that he wrote a couple of years ago, and I was looking up some stuff when I knew we were having it in the show, Sean. Is there a story from your book? You know, I know the Ali-Semenko fight is in there. The world's most beautiful sport, the world's most ridiculous league. Is there one quintessential story that would sum up the world's most ridiculous league from your book?
You know what? I think my favorite is the one where you go back to the 70s and you got the Sabres and the Canucks coming into the league and two new expansion teams, and you got to figure out who's going to get the first overall pick in the draft. And it's important because the first pick in the draft is going to be Gilbert Perreault, who's blue chip prospect turns into a Hall of Famer. And you would think the league would just flip a coin. Seems nice and easy, but instead they go to this big dramatic thing. They get a big raffle wheel. They put numbers on it. They realize they've got the wrong number of numbers, and finally they spin the wheel. And the league president gets up and he says, "Okay, the Vancouver Canucks have won," except the Canucks hadn't won. He misread the wheel, and the Sabres had to go up and say, "No, we got to look at it again." Just this total mess that could have been avoided by just flipping a coin. And to me, that's the classic NHL. Even when they try to be entertaining and they try to do something a little different, it always just seems to blow up in their face.
He's Sean McIndoe, covers the NHL for The Athletic, co-host of the Puck Soup podcast, and follow him on Twitter at Down Goes Brown. Sean, thanks so much for your time and your insight, and be safe, stay well, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Will do. Thanks, guys.
Sean McIndoe, kind enough to join us here on Miller and Moulton.
Did you know that? I'm sure you did. Do you know that the Edmonton Oilers brought in Muhammad Ali to fight Dave Semenko?
No. I knew about Ali and Lyle Alzado. I knew about Ali and the Japanese sumo guy. I did not know about Dave Semenko. No.
I didn't either, and I was just looking through the stuff from this book, and it was in the 80s. Ali was done fighting. But they brought him in on June 12th, 1983 to take on Dave Semenko. It was promoted by Messier's uncle, Larry Messier. 6,000 fans show up. It was a draw. Apparently, Ali spent much of the 3 rounds toying with Semenko. There's a video of it, of, just a lot of fun. But at the end, Ali said the bout wasn't, he said he wasn't at the bout for the money because you couldn't afford to pay me. I'm here because you all have followed me over the years. You can tell your grandchildren you did see him. Apparently, at the end of the fight in round 3, Ali decided to box and bloodied up Semenko a little bit by the time it was over.
There you go. So he carried him for 6 minutes and then said, "Okay, all right."
They carried him for 8. Carried him for 8. The final minute of the 3rd round, he threw a series of punches that says stung Semenko, who was bloodied following the exhibition.
Just to let you know, I may not be on skates, but here's how it goes. Here's how it works. And by the way,
I never knew that until this morning. 5 o'clock this morning is when I found that one out. And I'm like, wow, it's a great story.